My parents sat across the courtroom wearing masks of pious suffering, demanding control over every single thing I owned. They claimed I was too unstable to manage my life. I remained silent, waiting for their greed to become their cage. The bailiff began reading the list of liabilities they had just legally accepted. By the third item, the judge leaped from his bench in terror. My parents finally realized they had not won a fortune, but a prison sentence. My name is Hazel Parker, and as I sat at the defendant's table, I looked exactly like the woman my parents claimed I was. My blazer was a wrinkled charcoal gray, pulled from the back of a closet I had not opened in days. My hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot that frayed at the edges. My eyes were dry, red-rimmed, and staring at a fixed point on the scuffed mahogany table. To the casual observer, I was a portrait of a woman who had lost her grip on reality. I was the broken daughter. I was the financial disaster. I was the shame of the Parker family, but appearances are a currency, and I had spent the last week inflating the value of this particular look. Across the aisle, the performance was even more elaborate. My father, the Reverend Grant Parker, sat with his posture slumped just enough to suggest a heavy heart, yet upright enough to maintain the dignity of the pulpit. He wore his Sunday best, a navy suit that cost more than my first car, and he kept a comforting hand on my mother's shoulder. Lillian Parker was a vision of maternal grief in muted pastels. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief that remained suspiciously dry, projecting the image of a mother who had cried all her tears and was now running on pure, sacrificial love. They looked like saints. They looked like victims. They looked like they were trying to save me. Standing between us was their lawyer, Gavin Blackwell. He was a man who smelled of sandalwood and expensive ambition. He moved around the courtroom with the easy confidence of someone who had already checked the scoreboard and saw he was winning by 50 points. He did not look at me. To him, I was not a person. I was an asset to be seized. A column on a spreadsheet that needed to be moved from the debit side to the credit side. "Your Honor," Blackwell said, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room, "we are not asking for this conservatorship lightly. Reverend and Mrs. Parker are heartbroken, but given Miss Parker's recent erratic behavior, her inability to manage basic finances, and the potential danger she poses to her own future, we believe immediate intervention is necessary. We are asking for full control of her assets and legal decisions. It is a matter of safety." Judge Randall Hart nodded slowly. I watched him over the rim of my glasses. I knew Judge Hart, not personally, but I knew his type. He was a man who played golf on Sundays and likely attended my father's Easter services to be seen by the right voters. He looked at my parents and saw peers. He saw a distinguished clergyman and his devoted wife dealing with a prodigal daughter. He looked at me and saw a mess. "Miss Parker," Judge Hart said, turning his gaze toward me. His tone was paternal, condescending. "Do you have any objection to the motion presented? Your counsel has been notably silent." I did not have counsel. I had fired the court-appointed attorney 2 hours ago because he wanted to settle. I was representing myself, which usually signaled to a judge that the person was indeed mentally unstable. I cleared my throat. It sounded loud in the quiet room. The air conditioner hummed a low mechanical drone, vibrating against the wood paneling. "No, Your Honor," I said. My voice was raspy, quiet. I saw Gavin Blackwell smirk. I saw my father's shoulders relax. "I am tired. If my parents want to take responsibility for my life, I will let them. I just want this to be over." My mother let out a small, audible sob of relief. It was a nice touch. "However," I continued, keeping my eyes on the table, "I want to follow proper procedure. If they are taking full legal ownership of my estate, my assets, and my liabilities, I want the transfer to be absolute, immediate, no probate periods, a full assumption of all legal standing." Judge Hart looked surprised by my capitulation. "That is standard in a total conservatorship. Miss Parker, your parents will assume full legal authority." "Then I am ready to sign," I said. Gavin Blackwell practically sprinted to the bench to retrieve the paperwork. He placed the heavy stack of documents in front of me. I could smell the fresh toner. These papers were a death warrant for my autonomy. They gave Grant and Lillian Parker the right to access my bank accounts, sell my property, read my mail, and make medical decisions for me. They gave them everything. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I looked at my father. For a split second, the mask slipped. The grief vanished, replaced by a hungry, predatory glint. He was not looking at his daughter. He was looking at the condo in downtown Seattle that he planned to liquidate. He was looking at the retirement accounts he planned to raid to fund his newest church expansion project. He was looking at a payday. I signed my name, Hazel Marie Parker. The ink was black and permanent. I pushed the papers toward my parents. They signed with flourish. My father's signature was large, looping, assertive. My mother's was small and tight. They were so eager. They did not even read the addendums. They did not ask why the file was thicker than usual. They just saw the finish line. "Excellent," Judge Hart said, looking at the clock. It was nearly 11:30 in the morning, and he probably had a lunch reservation. "The court recognizes the transfer of guardianship and asset control to Grant and Lillian Parker. The bailiff will update the record." I stood up slowly. "Your Honor," I said. "Procedural request. Since the transfer is immediate, the court requires the bailiff to read the official inventory of assets and liabilities into the record, to ensure the guardians are aware of what they have taken into their possession." Blackwell waved his hand dismissively. "Your Honor, we can waive the reading. We are aware of the assets. It is required by the statute I cited in the addendum," I said, my voice gaining a fraction more steel. "To protect the guardians from undisclosed surprises, unless the court wishes to bypass transparency." Judge Hart sighed. He wanted his lunch, but he also wanted to appear thorough. "Deputy Alvarez, please read the summary list. Keep it brief." Deputy Alvarez, a man with a thick neck and a face made of stone, picked up the file I had submitted to the clerk earlier that morning. It was the file my parents had just signed for. They owned it now. My parents leaned back in their chairs, comfortable, victorious. They expected to hear about my savings account. They expected to hear about my luxury apartment. "Item 1, Alvarez read, his voice flat and booming. "Residential property located at 402 Skyline Avenue, Unit 12B, current market valuation, $850,000. My father smiled. He actually smiled. That was the prize. He was already spending that money in his head. "Item 2, Alvarez continued. "Primary mortgage on said property, outstanding balance, $600,000, second lien against the property, held by Apex Private Lending. For business debts incurred $200,000. My mother froze. Her head snapped toward my father. The smile on Grant's face faltered. They thought the condo was nearly paid off. They did not know I had leveraged it to the hilt 3 weeks ago, but that was just money. Money they could fix. Money they could beg from the congregation. "Item 3, Alvarez read, turning the page. The room was silent. I watched the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light falling from the high windows. This was it. The moment I had lived for. Assumption of legal liability for the defendant's position as sole signatory for the shell corporation known as Verity Holdings. Alvarez paused. He squinted at the paper, as if he could not believe what he was reading. "Note attached," Alvarez droned on. "Verity Holdings is currently the named defendant in a federal Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act investigation regarding money laundering for the—" He stopped. Judge Hart stood up. He did not just stand. He shot up from his leather chair as if a live current of electricity had surged through the seat. His face went from a bored flush to a sickly, ash-gray sheet of terror. "Stop," the judge barked. His voice cracked. "Deputy, stop reading." "Sir, the list says—" I said stop. Judge Hart slammed his gavel down, but he missed the block, hitting the wood of the bench with a deafening crack. He looked at me. For the first time, he really looked at me. He saw the cold intelligence behind the red eyes, He saw the trap snapping shut. The name Alvarez was about to read the organization Verity Holdings was laundering for was not a street gang. It was a network that funneled dark money into local political campaigns, including the campaign of the man sitting on the bench, including the charitable foundation my father used to hide his tax-free income. My father was halfway out of his chair. "What is this? We did not agree to this." "You signed it," I said. I did not shout. I spoke at a normal conversational volume, but in the stunned silence of the courtroom, it sounded like a gunshot. "You argued for full control. You argued that I was incompetent. You demanded total legal assumption of my affairs. Verity Holdings is my affair, and now, legally, it is yours." "Your Honor," Gavin Blackwell was screeching now, his composure shattered. "This is entrapment. My clients cannot be held responsible for criminal investigations attached to the defendant." "They aren't attached to me anymore," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the table. "I have been declared incompetent. Remember, I lacked the capacity to understand what I was doing. But you, the pillars of the community, you just signed a document accepting full fiduciary responsibility for every entity under my name. You just told the federal government that you are the ones in charge." Judge Hart was breathing heavy, short, panic-filled breaths. He looked at the court reporter, who was typing furiously. He looked at the bailiff. He looked at the open doors at the back of the room. "Clear the court," Judge Hart whispered. Then he yelled it. "Clear the court. I am calling a recess bailiff. Secure the doors." My mother was gripping my father's arm so hard, her knuckles were white. Grant, what does that mean? What is a RICO investigation?" My father looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, but beneath the hate, there was fear, a deep, trembling fear that he was looking at the end of his world. I stood up and buttoned my wrinkled blazer. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The crushing weight of their expectations, their greed, and their manipulation had been lifted off my shoulders and placed squarely on theirs, signed and notarized by the state of Washington. They thought they came here to take everything I have. In reality, they came here to inherit the consequences. 2 weeks before the gavel slammed down in that courtroom, I was sitting in the corner booth of the Gilded Stag, a restaurant perched on the 42nd floor of a downtown Seattle skyscraper. The air inside smelled of truffle oil, aged leather, and the specific, metallic scent of money being spent by people who did not actually have it. We were there to celebrate my brother Colton. Again. Colton Parker was 32 years old, wore suits that were tailored a little too tightly around the chest, and had a resume that read like a warning list for venture capitalists. He had failed at real estate, failed at cryptocurrency trading, and failed at running a high-end coffee franchise. Yet, tonight, we were toasting his latest phantom success. He called it a boutique consulting firm for lifestyle optimization. I called it unemployment with a better logo. My sister-in-law, Brielle Vaughn, sat to my left. She was the kind of woman who treated every moment of her life as content for an invisible audience. Her phone was propped up against the salt shaker, the flash illuminating our faces in harsh, staccato bursts. She was an influencer in the same way I was an astronaut. She had the costume, but she had never actually been to space. "Okay, everyone smile," Brielle commanded, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the dining room. "Colton, hold up the bottle. No, the label out. We need to see the vintage. Hazel, stop looking so miserable. It is a celebration." I forced the muscles in my face to twitch upward. I was not miserable. I was exhausted. I had spent 10 hours that day at Harborcrest Forensic Solutions, buried in spreadsheets, tracing a complex embezzlement scheme for a mid-sized logistics company. My eyes burned from staring at screens, and my brain was still looping through transaction codes. No one at the table asked me about my day. No one asked about the promotion I was up for. In the Parker family ecosystem, I was not a protagonist. I was a background extra who was expected to help fund the production. My father, the Reverend Grant Parker, beamed at his son. "To Colton," he said, raising his glass of Cabernet. The wine was $200 a bottle. We were on our third bottle. for stepping out in faith, for leading the way. Amen. My mother, Lillian, sighed. She looked glassy-eyed, caught in the romance of the moment. She loved the idea of success more than the reality of it. I always knew you had the vision. Colton, just like your father. Colton preened. He swirled his wine, looking at the legs on the glass like he knew what he was looking for. Thanks, Dad. It is going to be big. We are talking 6 figures in the first quarter. Conservative estimate. I took a sip of my water. I knew for a fact Colton had borrowed $5,000 from my parents last week, just to put a deposit on his leased BMW. The cognitive dissonance at the table was strong enough to cause a migraine. Brielle snapped her fingers at a passing waiter. She did not make eye contact. Excuse me, we need more bread, and the lobster mac and cheese. Make sure it is hot this time. The waiter, a young man with tired eyes and a name tag that read David, nodded stiffly. Of course, ma'am. Right away. She is charming, isn't she? I muttered into my glass. Brielle turned to me, her smile tight and predatory. What was that? Hazel, I could not hear you over the sound of us actually enjoying life. You should try it sometime. Maybe get out of that cubicle. I have an office, actually, I said. With a door? An office where you ruin people's fun, Colton interjected, laughing as if it were a joke. Hazel the buzzkill, always looking for the error in the math. Someone has to count, I said. The dinner dragged on for 2 hours. They ordered the Wagyu beef, the seafood tower, the truffled potatoes. They ordered a dessert platter that smoked with dry ice. Brielle filmed it all. She tagged the location, tagged the wine brand, tagged her outfit. She was building a narrative of a wealthy, successful family. I sat there eating my Caesar salad and drinking tap water, watching the performance art of delusion. Then came the moment I had been dreading. The moment that always came. The waiter placed the leather folio on the table. It sat there, black and ominous, directly in the center of the white tablecloth. The table went silent. Colton suddenly found something very interesting on his cufflink. My father cleared his throat and looked out the window at the Space Needle. My mother began rummaging in her purse for lipstick. Brielle, ever the operator, reached out with a manicured hand. She did not open the folder. She simply placed 2 fingers on it and slid it across the tablecloth. It stopped inches from my plate. Well, Brielle said, her voice bright and airy. Since Hazel is the one with the steady paycheck, and since we are all celebrating Colton, I think it is only fair. I stared at the black leather. I did not touch it. Fair. Colton is launching a business. Hazel, my mother said, applying a fresh coat of pink to her lips. Cash flow is tight in the beginning. You know how it is. And you well. You have so few expenses. You live so simply. I lived simply because I was saving to buy my freedom. I lived simply because I had spent my 20s paying off the debts they had guilted me into co-signing. I opened the folder. The number at the bottom of the receipt was staggering. $3,482.50 for a Tuesday night, for 4 people. I looked up at them. They were watching me, not with gratitude, but with expectation. It was an assumption. I was the safety net. I was the bank. I am not paying this, I said. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was sharp. Excuse me? Brielle let out a harsh laugh. Do not be tacky, Hazel. The waiter is watching. Let him watch, I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet. I took out 3 $20 bills and placed them on the table. I had a salad and an iced tea. My portion comes to $28. I am leaving $60. The rest is for the tip. My father turned from the window. The benevolent pastor mask was gone. His eyes were hard. Hazel, do not make a scene. This is your brother's night. Then let my brother pay for it, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Or you can pay for it. Dad, you are the one toasting him. We are a family, my mother hissed, leaning across the table. We support each other. Why do you always have to be so selfish? Why do you have to count every penny?" "Because I earned every penny," I said. "And I am done watching you throw money into a fire and expecting me to put it out." I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. Brielle grabbed the folder, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "You are unbelievable. You think you are better than us because you have some corporate job. You are nothing without this family. Hazel, you are just a lonely spinster with a calculator." "Brielle," Colton warned. But he did not look at me. He looked terrified that the waiter might ask for his card. "No, let her speak," I said, picking up my purse. "She is right. I do live by numbers, and the numbers say this investment is a loss." I turned to the waiter, who was hovering nearby, looking uncomfortable. I walked up to him and pressed another $50 bill into his hand. "I am sorry for them," I said quietly. "If they stiff you on the tip, know that it is not a reflection of your service. It is a reflection of their character." "Hazel," my father's voice boomed. Heads turned at the nearby tables. He was used to commanding a room, used to his voice bringing silence, but I was not in his church anymore. "Good night," I said. I walked away. I did not run. I walked past the table of businessmen eating steak. I walked past the couple on a first date. I kept my chin up, my back straight. Behind me, I could hear the rising volume of their panic. "She cannot just leave." Brielle's voice was shrill. "Grant, do something." "Sir, do you want to use the card on file?" the waiter asked. "No, that card is maxed, I mean. Use the other one." Colton stammered. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of my family imploding. The silence in the elevator was profound. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the door and exhaled. I had done it. I had finally drawn the line. But instead of relief, I felt a cold, creeping dread. I knew them. I knew this was not the end. This was the declaration of war. By the time the valet brought my car around, my phone had vibrated 12 times. I got into my sedan, a sensible, 4-year-old model that was fully paid off, and drove toward the highway. The city lights smeared into streaks of gold and red against the rain on my windshield. I let the voicemail play over the car speakers. "Hazel Marie Parker." My father's voice filled the small cabin. It was the voice he used for sermons about hellfire. "I do not know what demon has possessed you tonight, but you have brought shame upon us. The Bible says honor your father and mother. It says to care for your own. You walked away from your flesh and blood over money, over worldly paper. You are lost, child. You need to repent. You need to fix this. I expect a transfer to cover the bill and an apology to your brother by morning. Do not test me on this. We protect this family's reputation. If you are not part of the shield, you are the enemy." The message ended. Then came a text from my mother. "Brielle is crying. Colton is so stressed he cannot eat. I hope you are happy. You have ruined everything." Then a text from Colton. "Dad is really mad. H. You know how he gets. Just send the money. Please. I cannot cover this." I drove onto the I-5, merging into the stream of traffic leaving the city. To my right, the skyline of Seattle rose like a fortress of glass and steel. It was beautiful and cold. I thought about the word family. It was supposed to mean safety. It was supposed to mean a soft place to land. But for me, it had been a tax, a subscription fee I had been paying since I was old enough to open a checking account. Brielle's words echoed in my head. "You live by numbers." She was right. I did. And as I drove through the dark, I ran the audit in my head. I looked at the emotional balance sheet. I looked at the years of withdrawals and the absolute zero of deposits. I turned off the radio. I turned off the phone. I pulled into the parking garage of my building, the one asset I truly owned, the one place they had not yet tainted. I sat in the dark with the engine running for a long time. My father said I was either part of the shield or the enemy. He thought that was a threat. He thought that would scare me back into line. But as I looked at the dark concrete wall in front of me, I realized he was right. I was not their shield. I never had been. I was their resource. I was a vein of ore they were mining until it collapsed. "This is not a family," I whispered to the empty car. "This is a system of extraction." And for the first time in my life, I decided to close the mine. I did not know yet what they would do to try and force it back open. I did not know about the court case, or the lies, or the ruin they would try to rain down on me, but I knew one thing. I was not paying for dinner. Not tonight, not ever again. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the quiet, cool air of the garage, leaving the phone and its demands on the passenger seat. The silence felt expensive, and for the first time that night, I was the one who could afford it. The digital lock on my front door beeped 4 times. Beep, 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 click. It was 6:14 in the morning. I was awake, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling painted a shade of white called blank canvas. I had not slept well since the dinner at the Gilded Stag. My mind had been running simulations, calculating potential retaliation scenarios like I was modeling risk for a corporate merger, but I had not calculated this. The sound of the door opening was not violent. It was entitled. It was the sound of people who believed that boundaries were suggestions and that my apartment was merely an extension of their estate. I sat up, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure adrenaline against my ribs. I grabbed my silk robe, wrapping it tight around me like armor. I did not own a gun. I did not own a baseball bat. My weapon of choice had always been logic, but logic is a poor shield against intruders who share your DNA. I walked into the living room. The morning light was gray and thin, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a waking Seattle. They were already making themselves comfortable. My father, the Reverend Grant Parker, was standing by the window, looking out at the view with a critical eye, as if assessing the property value. My mother, Lillian, was sitting on the edge of my pristine cream sofa, clutching her handbag with both hands, and Colton was pacing the rug, looking like a man who was waiting for the executioner. They turned as I entered. "You changed the code," I asked. My voice was rough with sleep, but steady. "I gave you that key 5 years ago for emergencies, for life or death situations, not for sunrise raids." "This is life or death. Hazel," my father said. He did not say hello. He did not apologize for waking me. He simply pivoted from the window and gestured to the coffee table. Lying on the glass surface, disrupting the symmetry of my art books, was a thick stack of legal-sized paper. "Sit down," my mother said. Her voice was trembling, but it was not with fear. It was with the frantic energy of a woman trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. "Please, Hazel, just listen." I remained standing. "I am listening from here. What is that?" Colton stopped pacing. He looked awful. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like the 32-year-old child he was. He could not meet my gaze. He looked at his shoes, expensive Italian loafers that were probably scuffed from pacing floors he did not own. "I made a mistake," Colton whispered. "A mistake is forgetting to file a receipt," I said. "A mistake is a typo. That stack of paper looks like a liability." "It is a bridge loan," my father interjected, stepping between me and Colton, shielding his golden boy. "A temporary liquidity issue. The consulting firm there were startup costs we did not anticipate, and the market shifted." "The market did not shift, Dad. Colton does not have a product," I said. I walked over to the table and picked up the document. I flipped to the second page, then the third. My auditor's brain kicked into gear, bypassing the emotional center. I scanned the terms: high interest, short term, confession of judgment clause. This was not a bank loan. This was private money, hard money, the kind of money that breaks legs if it does not get fed. I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. $240,000. I looked up. "You borrowed $250,000 from a private equity lender with no collateral. It is secured against future earnings," Colton mumbled. "There are no earnings," I snapped. "Colton, this is predatory lending. Who told you to sign this?" "It does not matter," my father said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of authority. "The note is due in full in 48 hours. or they execute the judgment. They will freeze his accounts. They will seize his car. They will put a lien on his house. Then let them, I said. I dropped the papers back onto the table. That is how debt works. You borrow, you pay, or you default. We cannot let him default, my mother cried out, standing up. Think of the shame. Think of the church. Think of his reputation. I am thinking about it, I said. I am thinking it is time his reputation matched his reality. Then, a thought struck me. A cold, sharp realization that cut through the fog. Does Brielle know? I asked. The reaction was immediate. It was kinetic. Colton flinched as if I had slapped him. My mother gasped. My father's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle feathering beneath his skin. She cannot know, Colton said, his voice cracking. Hazel, please, if she finds out I am broke, if she finds out I lied about the seed capital she will leave, she will take the dogs, she will destroy me on social media. You know how she is. She married a CEO. She did not marry a debtor. So you are lying to your wife? I said. And you want me to help you keep lying? We need a guarantor, my father said. He said it casually, like asking for a cup of sugar. The lender agreed to an extension and a restructuring if we provide a cosigner with verified assets and a clean credit history, someone with equity. You want me to sign this? I pointed at the document. You want me to attach my name, my credit, and my home to a loan that Colton has zero ability to repay. We will pay it back, my mother insisted. We just need time. We are selling the cabin at the lake. We are moving some funds around. Then you sign it, I said to my parents. You have assets. You have the house in Bellhaven. You have the church pension fund. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens right before a building collapses. My mother looked at my father. My father looked out the window. We cannot, my father said stiffly. Why not? Because we are leveraged, my mother whispered. I stared at them, the pillars of the community, the people who lectured me on stewardship every Sunday of my childhood. Leveraged on what? I asked. The house is paid off. You told me that 10 years ago. We took a second mortgage, my father said, his voice defensive, to help Colton with the franchise lawsuit, and then the market turned. And the college fund? I asked. It was a question I had buried for a decade, but it clawed its way out now. The bond Grandma left me, the one you said depreciated due to bad management when I got into MIT, that was a lie, wasn't it? My mother began to weep. It was a soft, pathetic sound. We had to. Hazel, Colton was in trouble. He had that issue with the girl in college, the legal fees we had to protect his future. You were so smart. We knew you would get scholarships. We knew you could work your way through. You are a survivor. Hazel, you always figure it out. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just the money. It was the value assignment. They had stolen my inheritance money left specifically for me by my grandmother to cover up my brother's crimes and failures. They had forced me to work 3 jobs while taking a full course load, while Colton drove a sports car paid for with my tuition. You stole from me, I said. The words tasted like ash. You stole from me to save him, and now you want me to sign over my future to save him again. It is not stealing, my father roared, turning from the window. The veneer of calm cracked. It is family resources. It all belongs to the family, and in this family, we prioritize the legacy. I am the family, I yelled back. I am the one with the job. I am the one with the assets. Why am I not the legacy? My father walked over to me. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, used to physically dominating a space. He stopped inches from my face. Because you are a girl, he said. He said it with such absolute conviction, such biblical certainty, that it almost didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like he was stating the laws of physics. You are a daughter, he continued, his voice low and dangerous. You will marry. You will change your name. You will belong to someone else's household eventually. Colton carries the Parker name. He is the line. He is the one who matters to history. You are support staff. You can take the hit. You are tough. Nobody cares if a woman goes bankrupt. She just marries up. But a man cannot recover from this. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me. I looked at the man who stood in the pulpit every week and preached about justice and love. And I realized, with crystal clarity, that he did not love me. He might have affection for me, the way one has affection for a useful appliance, but he did not value me as a human being. I am not signing, I said. My father's face turned a mottled shade of purple. What did you say? I said no. I will not sign. I will not pay. I will not be the guarantor. I stepped back, creating distance. Colton can sell his watch. He can sell his car. He can tell his wife the truth. Maybe Brielle has some money hidden away. Go ask her. You are sentencing your brother to ruin. My mother sobbed. How can you be so cold? Where is your heart? My heart is in my chest, where it belongs, I said. Not in Colton's wallet. You will sign this paper, my father said. It was not a request anymore. It was a command. You will sign it, or you will regret it. Do not think simply because you have a little job and a little apartment that you are untouchable. I made you. I can unmake you. Is that a threat? I asked. It is a promise, he hissed. I am a shepherd. Hazel, but a shepherd knows how to use the rod when the sheep stray. You have strayed. You have become arrogant. You think you are better than us. I am better than you, I said. I pay my own bills. I walked to the door and pulled it open. The morning air rushed in from the hallway, cool and clean. Get out, I said. Hazel, Colton started, finally looking up. Get out, I screamed. It was the first time I had raised my voice to that level in years. All of you, get out of my house, now. My father glared at me, his eyes full of promised retribution. He snatched the papers from the table. He marched past me, his shoulder checking mine hard enough to make me stumble. You have chosen your path, daughter, he spat as he passed. My mother followed, clutching her purse, looking at me with a mix of pity and disappointment. I will pray for you, Hazel. I will pray for your hardened heart. Colton was the last. He paused at the door. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he might apologize. I thought he might acknowledge that he was the parasite destroying the host, but he just shook his head. You do not understand pressure, Hazel. You just do not understand. Then he walked out. I slammed the door. I threw the deadbolt. I leaned my back against the wood and slid down until I hit the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely clasp them together. I did not cry. Crying was for people who believed things could be fixed with tears. This could not be fixed. I pulled my phone from my robe pocket. My fingers fumbled as I opened the smart home app. I deleted the user code labeled Family Emergency. I deleted it and watched the line of data vanish. Then I changed my master code. I called the concierge desk downstairs. This is Hazel Parker in 12B, I said, my voice sounding incredibly calm, almost robotic. I need to report an unauthorized entry. Yes, family members. They are leaving now. I want their names removed from the approved guest list, permanently. If they try to come up again, call the police. Do not call me. Call the police. Understood, Ms. Parker, the concierge said, sounding alarmed. Is everything all right? No, I said. But it will be. I hung up. I sat there on the floor. In the silence of my reclaimed apartment, I could still smell my father's cologne, a heavy musk that lingered like a bad memory. Then, through the thin gap at the bottom of the door, I heard footsteps pausing in the hallway. They had not gone to the elevator yet. I held my breath. She is dead to me, my father's voice rumbled, muffled but audible. Ungrateful wretch. Grant, what do we do? My mother whispered. Her voice was frantic, sharp. The lender calls tomorrow. If they freeze the accounts, the church board will find out about the transfers. We will lose everything. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. She gave us no choice, my father said. His tone had changed. It was no longer angry. It was clinical. It was the voice of a general deciding to sacrifice a battalion. She is clearly unwell. Did you see her eyes? Did you hear how she spoke paranoid, delusional? Grant, if she cannot manage her decisions, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that chilled my blood, then the law says someone must manage them for her. We have to do the other thing. Call Dr. Eris. Call the lawyer. But Grant, that is extreme. It is necessary, he said. She has the assets. We have the need. And after today, I have the justification. Let's go. The elevator chimed. The doors opened and closed. They were gone. I sat on the floor, staring at the brass lock mechanism. Paranoid, delusional, unwell. I knew those words. I worked in fraud. I knew how narratives were built. They were not just going to sue me. They were not just going to smear me. They were going to invalidate me. My father was right about one thing. He was a shepherd, and he was getting ready to shear the sheep. I stood up. My knees popped. I walked into the kitchen and poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. I needed to be clear. I needed to be sharp. War, I whispered to the empty room. I walked to my home office and turned on my server. If they wanted to question my sanity, fine. But they had forgotten one thing about their daughter. I kept receipts. I kept every single receipt. And if they wanted to bring the law into this, I would make sure the law saw everything. Not just the frantic woman in the wrinkled robe, but the paper trail that led straight back to their sins. I opened a new file on my secure drive. I named it Operation Exodus. They wanted my life. They would have to choke on it. It had been exactly 48 hours since I threw my family out of my apartment. 48 hours of silence. No texts, no calls, no pounding on the door. In my line of work, silence is rarely a sign of peace. It is usually the quiet before the audit findings are released. It is the time taken to build a case. I walked into the lobby of Harborcrest Forensic Solutions at 8:15 in the morning. I was carrying a travel mug of black coffee and wearing a suit that I had picked up from the dry cleaners the day before. I felt armored. I felt ready to bury myself in the soothing, logical world of forensic accounting, where numbers did not lie and liabilities were always clearly defined. I approached the security turnstiles. I had walked through these gates every weekday for 6 years. I pulled my lanyard from my bag and tapped my badge against the black plastic reader. Usually, there was a cheerful chirp and a green light. Today, there was a harsh, low buzz. A red light flashed. Access denied. I frowned and tapped it again. Buzz. Red light. Must be the magnetic strip, I muttered to myself. I looked up at the security desk. Frank, the guard who usually greeted me with a joke about the weather or the Mariners' score, was sitting behind the glass. "Hey, Frank," I called out, forcing a smile. "My badge is acting up. Can you buzz me through?" Frank did not smile back. He did not even look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the monitors in front of him, his posture stiff. "I cannot do that, Ms. Parker." "What do you mean?" "It is me, Hazel." "I have instructions, ma'am," Frank said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "Your credentials have been revoked pending a security review. Please step away from the turnstile." Revoked. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my spine. By whom HR? Is this about the server update? "Please step away, ma'am," Frank repeated. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that terrified me more than anger. I saw pity. He looked at me like I was a sick animal that needed to be put down. "Do not make me call the escort." Before I could ask another question, the revolving doors behind me whooshed open. A man in a cheap brown suit stepped into the lobby. He scanned the room, spotted me standing by the turnstiles, and made a beeline for me. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand. "Hazel Marie Parker," he asked. I took a step back. "Who are you?" "Process server," he said, thrusting the envelope toward my chest. "You have been served." He did not wait for me to take it. He let it drop onto the polished marble floor at my feet, turned around, and walked out. I stared at the envelope. It lay there like a landmine. I crouched down and picked it up. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a sudden, violent drop in blood sugar. Or maybe it was adrenaline. I tore the flap open. The header was bold and capitalized. Superior Court of Washington, County of King, ex parte. Order for emergency. Temporary guardianship of estate in person. Petitioners: Grant Parker and Lillian Parker. Respondent Hazel Marie Parker. I read the first paragraph, then the second. The lobby of my office building began to spin. The marble floor seemed to tilt under my heels. Finding that the respondent poses an immediate danger to herself and her estate due to severe mental incapacity, evidence presented of acute paranoia, dissociative episodes, and reckless financial dissipation supported by the sworn affidavit of Dr. Marcus Aris, M.D. Doctor. Marcus Aris. I had never met a Dr. Marcus Aris in my life. I had not seen a doctor for anything other than a flu shot in 3 years. I looked at the date stamp. The judge had signed this late yesterday afternoon. An ex parte hearing. That meant emergency. That meant one-sided. That meant they had walked into a judge's chambers, told a horror story about their crazy daughter, cried a few tears, and walked out with the keys to my life. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was an email notification, not from my work email that was likely already cut, but from my personal bank. Alert account ending in 4492, status frozen, reason court order, another buzz, my credit card provider, transaction declined, recurring payment for cloud storage. Another, my brokerage account access suspended pending guardian authorization. I stood in the lobby of the building where I had built my career, holding a stack of papers that said I was legally no better than a child. In the span of 12 hours, while I was sleeping, they had erased me. They had not just sued me, they had deleted my autonomy. I looked back at the security desk. Frank was on the phone, speaking in a hushed tone, watching me. I turned and walked out. I did not run. I walked with the precise, clipped gait of a woman who had a meeting to get to, but I had nowhere to go. I got to my car, parked in the garage 2 blocks away. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I took a deep breath, counting to 10. Okay, Hazel, think. You are an auditor. This is a discrepancy. Find the source. I pulled out the affidavit from the envelope. I needed to see the evidence. I flipped past the legal jargon to the statement of facts. Respondent has exhibited a sudden and violent shift in personality. My father's statement read, on the night of October 14th, she became aggressive in a public setting, shouting incoherencies about extraction systems and refusing to acknowledge family members. She abandoned her family at a restaurant in a state of mania. They twisted the dinner. They took my refusal to pay my sane, logical boundary and painted it as a manic break. Respondent has ceased communication and barricaded herself in her residence, changing security codes in a paranoid attempt to lock out concerned family members. My self-defense was now proof of my sickness. And then, the doctor, Dr. Marcus Aris, based on a review of the subject's communications provided by the family and a detailed history of her erratic behavior described by Reverend Parker, it is my professional opinion that Ms. Parker is suffering from a psychotic break induced by stress and potential substance misuse. She lacks the capacity to manage her financial affairs or make medical decisions. Immediate conservatorship is recommended to prevent self-harm. He had diagnosed me without meeting me. He had declared me incompetent based on my father's lies. It was unethical. It was malpractice. But it was also effective. It had worked. I grabbed my phone to call Evan, a lawyer I had worked with on a few fraud cases. He was expensive, but he was a shark. I dialed his number. Law offices of Evan Wright. The receptionist answered. Hi, this is Hazel Parker. I need to speak to Evan immediately. It is an emergency. One moment. Ms. Parker. I waited. The hold music was Vivaldi. It sounded mocking. Hazel. Evan's voice came on the line. He sounded guarded. I just got a call from a Gavin Blackwell. He says he represents your legal guardians. Evan, it is a lie, I said, my voice rising. They filed an emergency order based on false testimony. I need you to file a motion to vacate. Today. Right now. Hazel, listen to me, Evan said slowly. Blackwell sent over the order. It is signed by Judge Hart. It appoints your parents as guardians of your estate. That means they control your assets, including your ability to hire counsel. I have money. Evan, I have a savings account with 6 figures in it. You do not have access to it, Evan said, and neither do I. If I represent you, I cannot get paid unless your guardians authorize it, and Blackwell made it very clear they will not authorize me. So what? You are just going to leave me like this? I am sane, Evan. You know me. I know you, he said softly, but I also run a business. I cannot take a case this complex on contingency. Not when the opposing party holds the checkbook. You need a public defender, Hazel, or you need to convince the court to unlock funds, but I cannot act for you, not legally, not right now. He hung up. I stared at the phone. The screen went black. I was trapped. I had money, but I was poor. I had a voice, but I was legally mute. I had rights, but they had been signed away in a closed chamber while I slept. Then I realized something else. The order granted them guardianship of my person as well as my estate. That meant they could decide where I lived. They could decide if I needed treatment. They could commit me to a facility. And if they found me, they would lock me away in some expensive clinic where I couldn't talk to anyone, where I couldn't expose the loans, the theft, the fraud. They would medicate me until I actually was the broken woman they described. I started the car. I could not go back to my apartment. They would be there. They probably had a locksmith drilling the door right now, armed with the court order that said they owned the lease. I checked my purse. I had my wallet. I opened it and bypassed the platinum credit cards. They were useless plastic rectangles now. I reached into the hidden zipper pocket in the lining. Cash. I always carried $500 in hundreds. It was a habit from my first year as an auditor, when I learned that digital trails were easy to follow. But cash was a ghost. $500. That was a tank of gas and a few nights in a motel. I also had something else. In my laptop bag, in a small anti-static pouch. I kept 3 prepaid debit cards. I bought them every Christmas as bonuses for vendors. But I always kept a few spares. They were loaded with $200 each. Untraceable. Unfrozen. $1,100 total. That was my net worth. Yesterday, I was worth nearly $1 million on paper. Today, I was worth $1,100 and a tank of gas. I drove. I did not take the highway. The highway had cameras. I took the surface streets, winding through the industrial district south of the stadium. I found a motel near the airport, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed louder than the traffic, and they did not ask for ID if you paid up front. I paid for 3 nights with 3 crisp $100 bills. The clerk, a guy with a neck tattoo and tired eyes, barely looked at me. "Room 112, he said, sliding a physical key across the counter. "Checkout is at 11. No parties." "No parties," I agreed. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon pledge. I locked the door and slid the chain into place. I wedged a chair under the handle. I sat on the bed and opened the manila envelope again. I spread the documents out on the cheap floral bedspread. My parents had moved fast. They had weaponized the legal system with terrifying efficiency. They had used my gender, my single status, and my recent refusal to be their victim as evidence of my instability. They had found a doctor willing to sell his signature. They had found a judge willing to rubber stamp a concerned family's plea. It was dirty, it was unethical, but as I read through the lines of legal code, I realized something. It was also arrogant. They had moved too fast. In their haste to seize control, they had made statements under oath that were verifiable lies. My father stated I had been unreachable for weeks. My phone logs would show he called me yesterday. My mother stated I had no history of responsible employment. I had 6 years of performance reviews and tax returns that proved otherwise. Dr. Aris stated he reviewed medical records provided by the family. I had no medical records that indicated mental illness. If he produced any, they would be forgeries. They had built a fortress of lies. But they had built it on a foundation of paper. And they had made one critical error. They had brought this into the public record. As long as this was a private family dispute, it was my word against theirs. It was emotion against emotion. But now it was case number 244-9821C. Now there were transcripts. Now there were sworn affidavits. If I fought them in the mud, I would lose. They had the church, the community, the sympathy. But if I fought them in the paperwork, if I used their own filings against them, I pulled my laptop out of my bag. I did not connect to the motel Wi-Fi. That was insecure. I tethered it to my phone, knowing I had limited data before they likely cut my service too. I logged into the county court portal. I couldn't access my bank, but I could access public records. I downloaded the full docket. I downloaded every attachment. "You want to say I am crazy?" I whispered, my finger hovering over the trackpad. "Fine. Let's see how sane you look when the math is done." I was not Hazel Parker, the daughter, not anymore. I was Hazel Parker, the defendant. And for the first time in my life, I was going to be the most dangerous thing a corrupt system could face. A victim who took notes. I opened a new spreadsheet. I typed in the first entry. Statement of Grant Parker, October 14th. Next to it, I typed evidence to refute restaurant receipt timestamp, waiter testimony, text message logs. I worked until the sun went down. I ate a vending machine protein bar for dinner. I drank tap water from a plastic cup. My life had been stripped down to the studs. No home, no job, no money, no family. But as I sat in that dim motel room, bathed in the blue light of my laptop screen, I did not feel hopeless. I felt clarified. They had tried to bury me. They forgot that I was a seed, and they had just watered me with the very evidence I needed to destroy them. The heating unit in room 112 rattled like a dying engine, blowing air that smelled of burnt dust and stagnation. I sat cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by the only thing I had left: data. My world had shrunk to the 14-inch screen of my laptop and a cache of files I had saved to a secure cloud drive 3 years ago. Back then, my father had asked me to look over the church's books to optimize their tax filings. He had wanted to know if they could write off the new sound system as a community outreach expense. I had told him no. He had ignored me. But being a creature of habit, I had archived the raw data. I also had my own tax returns, where I had claimed my parents as dependents for a brief period when the market crashed in 2008. I had old emails where Colton begged for money, attaching his own disastrous bank statements as proof of his temporary poverty. It was a patchwork quilt of financial history, but to an auditor, it was a map. I was not looking for the money they were trying to steal from me. That was a fresh wound. I was looking for the infection that had caused the rot in the first place. Why were they so desperate? Why now? A $240,000 loan to a shark was bad, but for a man like Grant Parker, who commanded a congregation of 3,000 people, it should have been manageable, unless the well was already dry. I pulled up the church's public tax filings, Form 990, which were available online for any nonprofit. I placed them side by side with the old bank ledgers I had archived. I started looking for the bleed. In forensic accounting, we look for lifestyle discrepancies. It is the gap between what someone earns and what they drive, wear, and eat. My brother Colton drove a Range Rover. He wore watches that cost as much as a Honda Civic. He lived in a loft in Capitol Hill. Yet, his tax returns showed an income that barely hovered above the poverty line. So, who was paying for the Range Rover? I traced the line. My father's church, the Grace Community Chapel, had a discretionary fund called the Good Samaritan Outreach. It was designed to help parishioners in sudden financial distress, a noble cause. I looked at the disbursements for the last 2 fiscal years. There were the usual small amounts: $500 for rent assistance, $200 for groceries, but then there were the outliers. Recipient: the Heritage Preservation Society, amount $12,500, date February 4th. I checked my brother's social media archive. On February 5th, Colton had posted a photo of his new custom home theater system. I kept scrolling. Recipient, the Heritage Preservation Society, amount $8,000, date June 10th. On June 12th, Colton and Brielle had checked into a 5-star resort in Cabo San Lucas. The pattern was rhythmic. It was a heartbeat. Every time the church cut a check to the Heritage Preservation Society, Colton Parker had a good week. But who was the Heritage Preservation Society? The name sounded elegant. It sounded old money. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing my sister-in-law, Brielle, would brag about at a brunch. I searched the business registry for the entity. It was an LLC registered in Delaware, a state known for protecting corporate privacy, but the registered agent address was a P.O. box in Bellevue, Washington. I ran a cross-reference on the address. It was a mail drop inside a strip mall. Then I dug deeper into the authorized signatories. Delaware hides owners, but sometimes, if you are lucky, the annual report filing lists a manager. There it was. B.V. Management, Brielle Vaughn. I sat back against the hard headboard, the blue light of the screen stinging my tired eyes. It was a loop, a washing machine. My father took tithes from the congregation money given by little old ladies on fixed incomes and moved it into the Good Samaritan Fund. He then donated that money to a nonprofit controlled by his daughter-in-law. Brielle took the money, likely took a management fee, and then funneled the rest to Colton to fund their lifestyle. It was embezzlement. It was tax fraud. It was money laundering. But it was more than that. I looked at the administrative costs of the church itself. In the last year, the pastoral consulting fees had skyrocketed by 40%. I checked the dates. The spike coincided perfectly with the launch of Colton's failed crypto trading platform. They were not just supporting him, they were cannibalizing the church to keep him afloat. And now that the church was hollowed out, and Colton had racked up a debt even the church could not cover, they needed fresh meat. They needed me. I was the new host body. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. It was not the hot, tearful anger of a daughter betrayed. It was the icy, clinical anger of a professional who sees a messy spreadsheet. They were sloppy, they were arrogant, and they had left fingerprints everywhere. But I could not prosecute this myself. I was the crazy daughter. If I walked into the district attorney's office right now, waving these papers, they would check my ID, see the guardianship order, and call my father to come pick me up. I needed a weapon, or rather, I needed a soldier who knew how to wield one. I closed my laptop and reached for my burner phone. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago, not because I ever thought I would use it, but because it was a cautionary tale. Damon Rourke. 10 years ago, Damon had been the legal counsel for the regional synod that oversaw my father's church. He had asked questions. He had noticed that the numbers for the building fund did not add up. My father had destroyed him. He had spread rumors that Damon was an alcoholic, that he was stealing from the collection plate, that he was unfit. My father used his pulpit to excommunicate a man for the crime of doing his job. Damon lost his license, his reputation, and his practice. I waited. The phone rang 4 times. Yeah, the voice was gravel and cigarette smoke. Damon Rourke. Who is asking? Someone who knows where the building fund actually went. There was a long silence on the other end. I am listening. This is Hazel Parker, Grant Parker's daughter. He laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. You have got some nerve, kid. Your daddy ruined my life, and now you are cold calling me what? Did he run out of people to step on? He is trying to step on me, I said. He filed for emergency guardianship. He told the court I am insane. He seized my assets. The laughter stopped abruptly. Guardianship, the Britney Spears treatment. Full control, estate and person. He wants to liquidate my condo to pay off a loan shark my brother owes. Classic Grant, Damon muttered. Always robbing Peter to pay Paul, if Paul was his useless son. I have the ledger. Damon, I have the trail, the Heritage Preservation Society, the consulting fees, the whole cycle. You have proof. I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in feelings. I have the numbers. Meet me, he said. The Double R Diner on 4th, 1 hour. If you are wasting my time. Hazel. I will leave you with the check. I will be there. The diner was a relic of a Seattle that was slowly disappearing chrome, red vinyl, and the smell of frying onions at 2 a.m. It was raining, a relentless gray drizzle that soaked through my thin coat as I ran from my car to the entrance. Damon was in a booth at the back. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was gray and thinning, and his suit was off the rack, fraying at the cuffs, but his eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a man who had been waiting a long time for a train that finally arrived. I slid into the booth opposite him. I did not order. I simply placed a manila folder on the table. Inside were the printouts I had made at the motel's business center. Damon looked at the folder, then at me. You look like hell, kid. I feel focused, I said. Read it. He opened the folder. He put on a pair of cheap reading glasses. He traced the lines with a nicotine-stained finger. I watched him. I saw his eyebrows knit together as he connected the dots I had laid out. I saw his lips move slightly as he whispered the numbers. 12,000, 8,000, 40% increase. He stopped at the page where I had linked Brielle's LLC to the church disbursements. He looked up. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf seeing a wounded deer. The Heritage Preservation Society, he murmured. That is cute. Brielle is the manager. And the registered agent is a mail drop 2 miles from her house, I added. And here, he tapped the page, these transfers to the Pastoral Discretionary Fund. They match the dates of your father's trips to Vegas for those conferences. Almost to the dollar, I said. Damon closed the folder. He took off his glasses and leaned back. This is it. Hazel, this is wire fraud, tax evasion, private inurement. If the IRS sees this, your father loses his tax-exempt status. If the feds see this, your brother goes to prison. And my guardianship. If we prove the guardians are engaged in active criminal fraud involving the assets of the ward or using the guardianship to cover their own insolvency, the judge has to vacate the order. It is a conflict of interest on a nuclear scale. So you will help me, I asked. Damon sighed. He picked up his coffee cup. It was empty, but he held it like a prop. I am not a lawyer anymore, Hazel. Your dad made sure of that. I am just a consultant now. I cannot represent you in court. I do not need a lawyer to argue for me, I said. I need a strategist. I need someone who knows where the bodies are buried. I can represent myself if I have the ammunition. You build the bomb, I will drop it. You realize what happens if we do this? Damon asked. His voice was serious now. You are not just getting your house back. You are destroying them. Grant goes down. Lillian goes down. Colton definitely goes down. The church closes. The scandal will be front-page news. Pastor steals from flock to fund son's gambling and daughter-in-law's wardrobe. You will be the girl who put her own family in cuffs. They put me in a cage first, I said. They declared me legally incompetent so they could strip me for parts. They broke the contract of family a long time ago. I am just closing the account. Damon looked at me for a long moment. He was measuring me. He was looking for the hesitation, the daughterly guilt. He did not find it. Okay, he said, but we have to be smart. We cannot just run in there screaming fraud. The judge is already biased. Hart is a political climber. He loves your dad's voting bloc. So what is the play? We let them think they have won, Damon said. His voice dropped to a whisper. The hearing for the permanent guardianship is in 5 days. They will expect you to fight. They will expect you to scream, to cry, to bring in a psychiatrist to prove you are sane. That is what they want. It validates the hysterical woman narrative. And instead, you capitulate. Damon said, you offer them a settlement. You offer them everything. A total, voluntary transfer of assets. A full surrender. I frowned. Give them what they want. How does that help me? Because, Damon grinned, showing teeth that were slightly yellowed. When you transfer an estate, you have to list the liabilities. You have to disclose the debts, and if we structure the transfer correctly, we can attach their fraud to your name. I paused, my mind racing to catch up with his logic. Then it clicked. The shell companies, I whispered. If I accept responsibility for the shell companies and then transfer that responsibility to them. Exactly, Damon said. We make them sign a document where they legally acknowledge ownership of the entities they are using to launder the money. We make them claim the poison pill. They will not read it, I said, remembering the dinner, remembering how they signed the loan shark's papers without looking. They never read the fine print. They are too greedy. Greed is a blinder, Damon agreed. We will draft a voluntary asset transfer agreement. We will make it look like a surrender. But in the appendices, the boring, thick appendices that lawyers like Blackwell skim over, we will list every toxic asset, every fraudulent account, and every criminal liability you can find. And when the bailiff reads that list in open court, they will be confessing to federal crimes on the record, I finished. And Judge Hart will be sitting there, presiding over the documentation of a felony, Damon said. He will have no choice but to call the marshals. I looked at the folder on the table. It was no longer just a stack of paper. It was a guillotine blade. How much do you want? I asked. I have $1,100 in cash and debit cards. Damon shook his head. Keep your money, kid. You are going to need a suit for court. A nice one. Look successful. Look sane. Then why help me? Damon looked out the window at the rain-slicked street. Because for 10 years, I have wanted to see Grant Parker's face when he realizes he is not God. I would have done it for free. But if you win, buy me a steak. Deal, I said. I reached across the table and shook his hand. His grip was firm, dry, and real. Go back to your motel, Damon said. Stay off the grid. Write down everything you know about Brielle's company, every date, every amount. We need the list to be perfect, item 1 through item 10. By the time we get to item 3, the judge should be sweating. He will be, I said. I gathered my papers and stood up. I walked out of the diner into the cold Seattle rain. I was soaked instantly, but I did not feel the cold. I felt the heat of the fire I was about to light. I drove back to the motel, the windshield wipers slapping a steady rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2. I thought about my mother's tears. I thought about my father's sermons. I thought about Colton's arrogance. They wanted a list of my assets. Fine, I would give them a list. I would give them a list so heavy it would crush them. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the motel room. It was 3 a.m, and while the rest of the world slept, I was watching a stranger live in my home. Technically, Brielle Vaughn was family. Legally, she was an agent of my guardians. But as I watched the live stream feed on her public Instagram profile, she looked like a parasite that had finally burrowed deep enough to get comfortable. Hey guys, welcome back, Brielle chirped, holding her phone up high to get the best angle of her cheekbones. She was standing in the middle of my living room, the space I had curated with painstaking care, saving for months to buy the minimalist Italian furniture and the abstract art that brought me peace. Now, it looked like a staging area for a reality show about people with more money than taste. So, we are doing a little emergency reno, Brielle said, panning the camera around. We are staying here for a few weeks to help manage family business. And honestly, the vibe here was just so cold. Like, serial killer cold. Look at this. She pointed the camera at my bookshelf. My collection of first edition economics texts and vintage architectural journals was gone. In their place, she had arranged a series of beige ceramic vases and framed photos of herself and Colton. We cleared out all the boring stuff, she giggled. Hazel, my sister-in-law. You guys know the drama, she just had zero soul in this place. We are bringing the light back. We are bringing the warmth. I felt a physical ache in my chest, a sharp, hollow pang of violation. It wasn't just about the books, it was the erasure. She wasn't just moving furniture. She was rewriting my identity for her 50,000 followers. She was painting me as the cold, lifeless spinster, and herself as the vibrant savior bringing warmth to my frozen world. The comment section on the side of the screen scrolled by in a blur of emojis. User Stacy99. OMG, so much better. User Lux Life. You are a saint for dealing with that family drama. User Blessed Mom. Praying for her, but loving the vases, I wanted to throw the laptop across the room. I wanted to drive to downtown Seattle, kick down the door, and scream. But I heard Damon's voice in my head, gravelly and calm. Let them spend. Let them get comfortable. Every receipt is a nail in the coffin. I closed the browser tab, but I didn't stop watching. I switched to my email. Even though they had frozen my bank accounts, they hadn't changed the notification settings on my credit cards. They probably didn't even know how. They had the physical cards, or maybe just the numbers. But the digital nervous system of my finances was still wired to me. The alerts had been trickling in all day. Now, they were a flood. Transaction alert. West Elm, $3,450. Transaction alert. The Cellar Wine Merchants, $890. Transaction alert. Uber Black, 4 rides. Total $312. They were burning through my credit limits like they were printing free money. They called it guardianship expenses. They would argue in court that they needed to stay in my apartment to secure the asset, and therefore, they needed new furniture to make it habitable. It was theft disguised as bureaucracy. I opened a spreadsheet. I entered every single notification, date, time, vendor, amount. I cross-referenced them with the GPS data from the photos Brielle posted. Item 42, unauthorized renovation expense, $3,400. Note respondent did not authorize changes to the property. Guardians are dissipating estate assets for personal aesthetic preference. I worked through the night. By dawn, the list was 3 pages long. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I called the concierge desk at my building. I used a voice modulation app on my phone to deepen my tone slightly, sounding professional and detached. Good morning. This is Samantha from the legal office of Gavin Blackwell. I lied smoothly. I am calling regarding the Parker guardianship case for Unit 12B. The concierge, a new hire named Tyler, who didn't know me well, hesitated. Oh, yes, Mr. and Mrs. Parker are in the unit. Correct. We are updating the insurance liability files for the court. I need a copy of the visitor logs and key fob access records for the last 48 hours sent over to the registered email on file for the estate, just to confirm occupancy times. I would need to check with the board, Tyler stammered. It is a court compliance issue, Tyler, I said, injecting a note of boredom into my voice. If we do not have the logs by 9, the judge issues a non-compliant citation to the building management. Do you want me to hold? No, ma'am. Sending it now. 3 minutes later, the email arrived in my inbox. Because I was still the owner of record on the building's internal server, the registered email was mine. I opened the PDF. It was a goldmine. Colton Parker had entered the building at 10 in the morning. At 2 in the afternoon, a guest had been buzzed up. Name, Marcus Aris. I froze. Dr. Marcus Aris, the psychiatrist who had declared me insane without meeting me. He had visited the apartment. Why I switched apps to the smart home interface. They had changed the Wi-Fi password, which cut off my laptop access to the cameras. But they had forgotten about the secondary system, the smart thermostat and smoke detectors, which operated on a cellular backup for safety. The thermostat in the hallway had a presence sensor and a built-in microphone for voice commands. I couldn't get video, but I could pull the audio logs if the system detected a voice command trigger. I scrolled through the event history. There was a trigger at 2:15 yesterday afternoon. Someone had said the word temperature, which activated the recording. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The audio was tinny, mixed with static, but the voices were distinct. 72 degrees. It is freezing in here, Brielle's voice complained. Leave it. Colton's voice snapped. He sounded stressed. Listen, doctor, the judge signed the temporary order. We have control. When do we get the permanent certification? A third voice, smooth and oily. Dr. Aris. The hearing is in 4 days. As long as she doesn't show up, or shows up looking manic, it is a lock, but I need the rest of the fee. Colton, cash, like we discussed. I can't pull $5,000 cash from her account yet, Colton said. The bank has a 24-hour hold on withdrawals over $1,000. That is not my problem, Aris replied. I put my license on the line for that affidavit. If she gets a second opinion, I am exposed. Pay me, or I recant. Relax. My father's voice boomed from the background. We will transfer it from the church building fund as a consulting stipend. Just give us until Monday. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking. Witness tampering, bribery, fraud. They were not just managing my affairs. They were running a criminal enterprise out of my hallway. But there was something else. A detail in the visitor log caught my eye. Later that evening, at 9 o'clock, another guest had been buzzed up. Guest name S. Vance. The name triggered a memory, not a recent one, but something from deep in the archives of my brain. Vance. Where had I seen that name? I went back to the church financial records I had downloaded, the ones I had shown Damon. I searched for Vance. Nothing in the recent ledgers. I went further back. 5 years ago. There was a donation. Recipient Citizens for Ethical Justice. Amount $10,000. Memo Community Outreach. I searched Citizens for Ethical Justice. It was a defunct political action committee. I dug into the state archives for the PAC's registration. Treasurer Sarah Vance. And who was Sarah Vance? I ran a background check using the public data aggregator I used for work. Sarah Vance, employment clerk of the court, King County Superior Court, relation sister-in-law to Judge Randall Hart. The air in the motel room suddenly felt very thin. My father hadn't just gotten lucky with a sympathetic judge. He had bought a subscription to the judicial system years ago. The $10,000 wasn't a donation. It was a down payment on future favors. And as Vance visiting my apartment the night after they seized it, that wasn't a social call. That was a payoff delivery. They were using my apartment as a safe house to conduct the transaction. You idiots, I whispered. You arrogant, sloppy idiots. They thought they were untouchable because they had God on their side and a judge in their pocket, but they didn't understand that footprints are permanent. I opened a new document. I named it Exhibit C. Judicial Conflict of Interest. I started typing. I listed the donation. I listed the visitor log. I listed the connection between Sarah Vance and Judge Hart. This was the nuclear option. Damon had said we needed to trap them, but this was leverage that could disbar a judge. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. From unknown message. Your brother is trying to lease a commercial space in Pioneer Square under your name. He is using the court order as proof of authority. The landlord is calling for a credit check. Thought you should know. I stared at the screen. Who was this? Then I remembered the waiter at the Gilded Stag, the one I had tipped $60. Or maybe the concierge. Tyler, who felt guilty. Or maybe just someone in the universe who hated bullies. It didn't matter. The intel was good. Colton was signing a lease. He was entering into a contract that would bind me to years of rent for a business that didn't exist. My first instinct was to call the landlord and scream fraud, to stop it, but I stopped myself. If I stopped him now, it was just an attempt. It was a misunderstanding. If he signed the lease, it was fraud. It was a liability. It was a debt incurred by the guardian in the name of the ward for personal gain. Let him sign, I said to the empty room. I went back to my master list, the inventory of assets and liabilities that I was preparing for the surrender. I added a new category. Item 7, Commercial Lease Agreement Pending, Lessee Hazel Parker, via Guardian Colton Parker, Liability, $300,000 over 5 years. Note: Lease secured for unrelated business entity owned by Guardian. Conflict of interest documented. I was building a bomb, a paper bomb. Each receipt, each log, each recording was a stick of dynamite. And in 3 days, I was going to walk into court hand the match to my father, and ask him to light it. I stood up and walked to the dirty mirror in the motel bathroom. My eyes were dark, shadowed by exhaustion. My hair was a mess. I looked exactly like the woman they described in their affidavit. But behind the fatigue, I saw something else. I saw the auditor. They wanted to own me. They wanted to own my house, my money, my name. Fine, I told my reflection. You can have it. You can have all of it. I went back to the laptop and typed the final heading on the document. Appendix B, Undisclosed Criminal and Civil Liabilities. Accepted by guardians. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. I will let them own everything, I whispered, including the things they never bothered to read. The plan was simple, but like all simple things, it required perfect execution. I sat in the passenger seat of Damon's rusted sedan, parked 3 blocks away from the glass tower that housed the law offices of Gavin Blackwell. The rain had stopped, leaving the Seattle streets slick and gray, mirroring the color of my mood. "You understand the pivot?" Damon asked, staring out the windshield. He did not look at me. He was treating this like a bomb defusal operation. If you walk in there and fight, you validate their narrative. A sane person defends themselves. A crazy person attacks. But a broken person surrenders. "I surrender," I repeated, testing the weight of the words on my tongue. "I give up." "Exactly," Damon said. "You offer them the one thing they want more than control. You offer them speed. A guardianship hearing is messy. It takes time. Doctors, testimony. But a voluntary asset transfer that is immediate, that is clean. And the trap? The trap is in the definition of the word asset." Damon smiled grimly. "In the eyes of the court, an asset is anything you possess. That includes your property, that includes your cash, but it also includes your legal entanglements, your shell companies, your liabilities. If they accept the estate in whole, they accept the cancer along with the host." I took a deep breath. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. I had chosen a beige cardigan and slacks that were slightly too big for me. I wore no makeup. I looked diminished. I looked like a woman who had been crushed by the weight of her own life. "One condition," I said, rehearsing the line. "It has to be done in open court." "Right, because you want the judge to witness your recovery. You want the public record to show you cooperated. That is the ego stroke for your father. He gets to look like the benevolent patriarch saving his wayward daughter in front of an audience." "He will love that," I said. "He will love it right up until the bailiff clears his throat." Damon said, "Go get them, kid." I walked to the building. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I was not afraid. Fear comes from uncertainty. I was certain. I entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 34th floor. When the doors opened, the reception area was silent, smelling of expensive leather and intimidation. "I am here to see Gavin Blackwell," I told the receptionist. My voice was small. "I do not have an appointment, but my parents are here." They were. I knew they were because I had tracked their phones. 5 minutes later, I was ushered into a conference room that cost more than my college education. My parents were sitting on one side of a long marble table. Gavin Blackwell sat at the head. They looked up as I entered. My mother looked anxious, her hands twisting a tissue. My father looked stern, ready for a fight. I did not give them one. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I did not make eye contact. I looked at the table. "I am tired," I said softly. The silence in the room was heavy. "Hazel." My mother's voice was tentative. "I am tired of fighting." I continued. "I read the affidavit. I read what the doctor said." I paused, letting a tremor enter my voice. Maybe you are right. Maybe I am not well. I have been under so much pressure at work. The numbers, they just keep spinning." I saw my father's posture relax. His chest expanded. He was winning. "We only want what is best for you, Hazel," he said, his voice dropping into his pastoral baritone. "We want to take the burden off your shoulders." "I know," I said. I looked up at him. making my eyes wide and watery. I want to give you the burden. I want to give you everything. I do not want to manage it anymore. The condo, the accounts, the investments. Take it. Just let me rest. Gavin Blackwell leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. He was a lawyer. He smelled a rat. Ms. Parker, are you saying you wish to consent to the guardianship? No, I said. Guardianship sounds like I am a child. It goes on my permanent record. It makes it hard to get a job later. Then what are you proposing? Blackwell asked. A voluntary asset transfer agreement, I said. Using the term Damon had drilled into me. I sign over full legal ownership and control of my entire estate to my parents. Irrevocable, immediate. They get title to the properties. They get power of attorney over the accounts. They get it all. In exchange, the guardianship petition is dropped. I go to a wellness retreat. I get better. But you keep the assets. My father's eyes lit up. This was better than guardianship. Guardianship had oversight. Guardianship had annual reports to the court. A transfer was a gift. It was ownership. That sounds very reasonable, my father said quickly. Hold on, Blackwell interrupted. Grant, we need to be careful. A transfer like that comes with tax implications, and we would need to do due diligence on the assets. I do not want due diligence, my father snapped. He was looking at me, seeing the $240,000 he needed to pay the loan shark in 48 hours. If he had title to my condo today, he could get a bridge loan against it tomorrow. We know her assets. We know the apartment. We know the accounts. Why delay? Because, Blackwell said slowly, looking at me with suspicion. If we accept the estate, we accept the liabilities attached to it. I have a mortgage, I said, shrugging weakly, and some credit card debt, maybe $5,000. That is it. See? My father waved a hand. Peanuts. The equity in the condo alone covers that 10 times over. I just want one thing, I said. What? Blackwell asked. I want it done in court, I said. I want Judge Hart to sign off on it. I want a record that I gave it voluntarily, so that later nobody can say I was forced. Nobody can say I was crazy. I want a clean slate. A public hearing. Blackwell frowned. That is unusual for a private agreement. It is necessary for my peace of mind, I said. And I want a full list, an inventory, everything I'm giving you. I want it read out loud, so I know that I am truly free of it. I want to hear that I do not own anything anymore. It will help me let go. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. Oh, Hazel, that sounds like a wonderful step toward healing, a cleansing. She bought it. She bought the spiritual angle. Grant, Blackwell looked at his client. We can do this in chambers. We do not need open court. No, my father said. He was smiling now, a greedy, triumphant smile. Let it be open. Let the congregation see that we have resolved this as a family. Let them see Hazel's repentance. It will be a testimony. Grant, I advise against rushing. Draw up the papers. Gavin, my father commanded. She is agreeing to everything we wanted. Do not bill me for another 10 hours of arguing when the war is won. Blackwell sighed. He opened his laptop. Fine. We will draft a stipulated agreement. We will present it to Judge Hart on Friday. We will attach an inventory. I will send over the list of assets, I said helpfully. I have it all on a spreadsheet, to save you time. Send it, Blackwell said. Clearly annoyed that his billable hours were being cut short, I stood up. I felt light, not the lightness of relief, but the lightness of a guillotine blade before it drops. Thank you, Dad, I said. Thank you for saving me. It is what fathers do, he said. I walked out of the office. I did not look back. 2 hours later, I was in a small internet cafe in the University District, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. I logged into the secure portal of the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower office. I had already prepared the file. Form 211, Application for Award for Original Information. I uploaded the documents I had compiled. the ledger showing the transfers from the church to Brielle's shell company, the proof of personal expenses disguised as charity, the text messages implicating my father in tax fraud. But I did not submit it against my father. Not directly. I submitted it against Verity Holdings and the Heritage Preservation Society. Then, I went to the State Attorney General's portal. I filed a consumer protection complaint regarding predatory lending and fraud against the same entities. I was not suing my parents. I was lighting a fire under the entities they were about to adopt. When I was done, I deleted the browser history. I walked out into the rain. The timing was crucial. These complaints would be in the system, time-stamped and logged, 48 hours before the hearing. They were dormant mines. When my parents signed that agreement in court, they would legally become the owners of Verity Holdings. They would become the responsible parties. And the moment the judge signed the order, the mines would become their problem. I went back to the motel. I sat on the bed and opened the spreadsheet Blackwell had asked for. Inventory of estate of Hazel Parker. I typed in the assets. Item 1 condominium at Skyline Avenue. Item 2 investment account ending in 449. Then, I scrolled down to page 4. The page Blackwell would likely skim because it was labeled Miscellaneous Administrative Entities. Item 7. Sole ownership and fiduciary liability for Verity Holdings, LLC. Item 8. Full legal assumption of all pending contracts and obligations of said entity. I added the lease Colton was trying to sign. Item 9. Commercial lease agreement for Pioneer Square property. I did not hide it. I put it right there in black and white, in 12-point Times New Roman font. Damon was right. Greed is a blinder. My father saw the condo. He saw the $1 million in equity. He did not care about the miscellaneous entities. He probably assumed Verity Holdings was just the shell company I used for my consulting work. He thought he was getting my business accounts. He did not know I had renamed my dormant consulting firm to match the name of the entity he was using to launder money. I had filed the name change paperwork 3 days ago online. It was legal. I owned a company called Verity Holdings. He was using a fake company called Verity Holdings. By accepting mine, he was accepting the name, and in the confusion of the court, the lines would blur until they strangled him. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Mom, I am so proud of you. Hazel, we are going to have a big dinner after court on Friday. Just us. A new beginning." I stared at the text. A new beginning. She had no idea. I replied, "I can't wait. I want everything to be out in the open." I put the phone down. Friday was going to be a bloodbath. But for the first time in years, the blood would not be mine. Thursday night, the eve of the hearing. I met Damon one last time. We sat in his car in the parking lot of a grocery store. "Did they sign the preliminary draft?" Damon asked. "Yes," I said. "Blackwell sent it over an hour ago. My father signed it. My mother signed it. They initialed every page." "Did they ask about item 7? "No." Damon let out a low whistle. "Man, he really is desperate for that cash." "He thinks he is smart," I said. "He thinks he can just sell the condo on Monday and pay off the shark. He thinks the rest is just paperwork." "And the judge? Judge Hart is presiding. He cleared his docket for it. He wants to get it done before his golf weekend." "Perfect," Damon said. "Hart is lazy. He will rely on the bailiff to read the summary. He won't read the appendices until it is too late." "I am scared, Damon," I admitted. It was the first time I had said it out loud. "What if they stop? What if Blackwell reads it at the last second?" "Then we pivot," Damon said. "But they won't. I know Grant Parker. I know men like him. Once they see the prize, they stop looking at the ground. He is looking at the horizon. Hazel, he is not looking for the bear trap at his feet." He handed me a folder. "Here, this is the script. Stick to it. Do not improvise. When the bailiff starts reading, you sit still. You look at your hands. Let the room react. Do not gloat. You are the victim until the gavel bangs." "I am the victim," I said. "Not anymore." Damon grinned. "Now, you are the architect." I took the folder, I went back to my room. I laid out my outfit for court. A charcoal gray suit, simple, professional, but not weak, not anymore. I stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my brother was probably popping a bottle of champagne, celebrating the windfall he thought was coming. Somewhere, my sister-in-law was planning how to redecorate my bedroom. "Enjoy it," I whispered. "It is the last night you will ever sleep soundly." I turned off the light. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and counted the items on the list. 1, 2, 3. At item 3, the world would change. I closed my eyes and waited for the sunrise. The elevator ride up to the 12th floor of the Skyline building felt different that night. Usually, this was the part of my day where I decompressed, leaving the noise of the city below to enter my sanctuary. Tonight, I was a visitor in my own life. I was the guest of honor at a party celebrating my own destruction. My parents called it a welcome home gathering. They told the invitees a hand-picked selection of church elders, wealthy donors, and the few socialites my sister-in-law Brielle had managed to claw her way into, knowing that I was recovering from a severe nervous episode. They said the family was rallying around me. I stood outside my door. I could hear the hum of conversation and the clinking of glass. I smoothed the front of the modest navy dress I had bought at a thrift store near the motel. It was demure. It was unthreatening. It was the uniform of a woman who had been broken. I punched in the code, not my code, but the one Colton had set 1234. The lack of imagination was almost insulting. The door slid open, and the smell hit me first. It was not the crisp scent of sage and rain that usually filled my apartment. It was the cloying, heavy smell of catered meatballs and expensive, heavy perfume. "Hazel." My mother's voice rang out, shrill and theatrical. Lillian Parker rushed across the room, her arms open wide. She was wearing a silk caftan that I recognized from a boutique in Bellevue, a piece that cost at least $800. She embraced me, her grip tight, warning. "We were so worried you wouldn't come out of your room," she whispered in my ear, her voice dripping with fake concern for the benefit of the audience. Then, tighter. "Smile. Do not embarrass us." I pulled back and gave a weak, watery smile. "I am here, Mom. I am just tired." "Of course you are. Darling," she announced loudly. "Everyone, she is just a little fragile, but look at her, back in the fold." I looked around the room. It was a desecration. My minimalist living room had been transformed into a Baroque nightmare. Brielle had draped gold shimmery fabric over my sleek gray sofa. There were massive, tacky floral arrangements of lilies and hydrangeas, blocking the view of the Space Needle flowers that I knew. From the invoices I had tracked, cost $400 a stem. On the dining table, where I usually kept my work files organized in neat stacks, there was a buffet of food that looked expensive but tasted of mass production. Silver warming trays, crystal bowls of caviar, bottles of champagne chilling in ice buckets. It looked like a funeral for a rich uncle that nobody liked. "Hazel, sweetie." Brielle floated toward me. She was holding a champagne flute, her other hand resting theatrically on her hip. She was wearing a dress I had seen in a magazine last month. It was an emerald green velvet slip dress. It retailed for $2,500. On her wrist was a stack of gold bangles that clattered when she moved. "Doesn't the place look so much more alive?" Brielle asked, gesturing with her glass. "We had to do something about that sterile office vibe you had going on. It was depressing, honestly." "It looks very full," I said softly. "It looks like a home," she corrected, her eyes hard. "Colton and I have been working non-stop to make it welcoming for the guests. You should thank him." I looked over at the balcony doors. Colton was standing there with 2 members of the church board, men in their 60s who owned car dealerships. Colton was holding a cigar and unlit prop and laughing loudly. He was wearing a new watch, a Breitling. I had seen the charge on my Amex yesterday. $6,000. "I will go say hello," I said. I navigated the room like a ghost. People looked at me with a mix of pity and curiosity. I heard the whispers as I passed. "That is her." the one who snapped, "She looks so normal." Well, it is the quiet ones, the stress of the secular world, you know. I kept my head down. I played the role, but my eyes were scanning everything. I was memorizing the faces of the people eating my food and drinking my wine, complicit in my erasure. I made my way to the kitchen island, which had been turned into a bar. I needed water. As I poured a glass from the tap, ignoring the bottled sparkling water Brielle had ordered, I saw a stack of mail on the counter. It had been pushed aside, buried under a tray of smoked salmon. I recognized the handwriting on one envelope. It was not addressed to me. It was addressed to Brielle, but it had been sent to my address, likely because she had forwarded her mail here the moment they seized the apartment. The return address was a collection agency in Nevada. Apex Recovery Services. I knew Apex. They specialized in gambling debts and high-risk personal loans. I slipped the envelope under my tray. I moved to a quiet corner near the hallway, slid it open with my fingernail, and glanced at the contents. It wasn't just a bill. It was a final notice, and it was addressed to Brielle Verzal. Verzal, not Vaughn. I did a quick mental calculation. Brielle Vaughn, the heiress to a non-existent shipping fortune, was actually Brielle Verzal, a woman with $40,000 in outstanding debt to a casino consortium in Las Vegas. I smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. I walked over to the balcony. Colton was alone for a moment, staring at his reflection in the glass, adjusting his tie. "Colton," I said. He jumped. He spun around, guilt flashing across his face before he masked it with arrogance. "Hazel, you are creeping around. Try to act normal. Okay, Mr. Henderson is thinking of investing in the firm." "The firm?" I asked innocently. "The one with no product." "We are pivoting," he snapped. "What do you want?" "I found this," I said, holding out the letter. It was mixed in with my medical bills. "I think it is for Brielle, but the name is wrong. Verzal, is that a cousin?" Colton frowned. He took the paper. "Verzal, I do not know any Verzal." He read the first line, then the second. I watched his face change. Colton was not smart, but he was paranoid. He was a man who lived on lies, so he recognized the scent of one immediately. 40,000, he whispered. Gambling debt. But she told me her family was strictly anti-gambling. She said, he looked up at me. "Where did you get this?" "It came in the mail," I lied. "I just thought if she's in trouble, you should know, as the head of the household." I used his own toxic masculinity against him. "She told me she was debt-free," Colton muttered, his face reddening. "She told me her trust fund was tied up in probate. Not this." "Maybe you should ask her," I suggested. "Before the hearing tomorrow. You do not want any surprises when you take over the estate assets. Right if she has debts, and you are married." I let the sentence hang. Colton crushed the paper in his hand. He marched across the room toward Brielle, who was laughing with the pastor's wife. I followed, keeping a safe distance, pretending to collect empty napkins. I saw Colton grab Brielle's arm. Not gently. He pulled her toward the hallway, away from the main crowd. "Ow, Colton! Stop, people are watching!" Brielle hissed. "Who is Brielle Verzal?" Colton demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. I moved closer, turning my back to them, picking up a discarded wine glass from a side table. "I do not know what you are talking about," Brielle said, but her voice wavered. "I have the letter. Brielle Apex Recovery. 40 grand. You told me you were an heiress. You told me your dad owned the Vaughn Logistics Group." "Lower your voice," Brielle snapped. The mask of the sweet wife dropped instantly. Her face twisted into a sneer. "So what? You told me you were a visionary entrepreneur, and look at you. You are a 32-year-old man living off his daddy's collection plate. I am the CEO of—" "You are a leech, Colton." Brielle cut him off. "Just like me. Why do you think I married you? I thought there was money, and then I find out your capital is just your dad shuffling funds from the Holy Spirit to your bank account. You knew about the church funds. Who do you think showed you how to structure the invoices?" Brielle laughed. A cruel, sharp sound. You were just taking cash like an idiot. I set up the Preservation Society. I cleaned you up. Colton, without me, you would be in jail for tax evasion. So do not talk to me about a little casino debt. That money from the church, it paid for your car and my silence. I stood perfectly still. I had heard it. I didn't have a recorder running. But I had heard the admission. And more importantly, Colton had heard it. The alliance was fractured. Colton looked at his wife with horror, not moral horror, but the horror of a man realizing he was not the user, but the used. "We will talk about this later," Colton hissed. "After tomorrow. After we get the condo." "Yeah." Brielle fixed her strap. "After we get the money, then we can hate each other in luxury." They separated. Colton went to the bar and poured a drink with shaking hands. Brielle went back to the party. Her smile plastered back on, but her eyes were cold and darting. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was my mother. "What were they arguing about?" she asked sharply. She had the radar of a bat. "I do not know," I said. "I think Colton is just stressed about the hearing." "He has nothing to be stressed about," Lillian said. "It is a formality. You are doing the right thing. Hazel." She steered me toward the balcony, away from the guests. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "Since we are doing the list, the inventory for the judge." "Yes." "Your great-aunt Martha's cottage," she said. "The one in Leavenworth, the one she left to you in her will 5 years ago." I nodded. It was a rundown cabin in the mountains. It wasn't worth much, maybe $200,000, but it was the only thing I had from Martha, the only person in the family who had actually liked me. "We need to include that in the transfer," my mother said. "But that wasn't part of the original petition," I said. "That is separate property." "It needs to be consolidated," Lillian said firmly, "for tax purposes. And well, Colton has always loved the mountains. It would be good for him, a place to clear his head. He is the eldest male. Hazel, historically, the land should go to him." She wasn't asking. She was taking. She was stripping me of even the sentimental scraps. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, who was standing in my hijacked apartment, asking me to give up my last refuge so her failure of a son could have a vacation home. I felt a flare of hatred so hot it almost burned through my calm facade, but I suffocated it. I poured it into the fuel tank for tomorrow. "You are right, Mom," I said. "Colton should have it. He deserves it. Good girl." She patted my cheek. "I will add it to the list tonight. I promised. I will make sure it is itemized. I want everything to be confirmed by the judge. No loose ends." "Exactly. No loose ends." She walked away, satisfied. She didn't know that the cottage in Leavenworth had a failing septic system that had been cited by the county for environmental contamination. The fine for non-compliance was currently $50,000 and rising daily. I had been negotiating a settlement, but if the title transferred, the fine transferred. "Enjoy the mountains, Colton," I whispered. I checked my watch. It was 10 o'clock. I slipped into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to mask the sound. I pulled out my burner phone. One text from Damon green light. "The AG's office has assigned a special investigator to the courtroom tomorrow. They are not intervening. They are observing. As soon as the signature hits the paper, the investigation goes live." I typed back. "The list is getting longer. They just asked for the Leavenworth property." "Damon, the one with the EPA violation." "Me, yes. Damon. Jesus, Hazel, they really are trying to eat the whole buffalo." "Me. Let them choke on the bones." I flushed the toilet and washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She was harder. She was colder. She looked like someone who had walked through fire and decided she liked the heat. I unlocked the door and went back out. The party was winding down. The guests were leaving, clutching goodie bags that Brielle had filled with cheap chocolates wrapped in gold foil. My father was at the door, shaking hands, playing the benevolent patriarch. "Thank you for coming. Please, Keep Hazel in your prayers. It is a long road, but with faith and family, she will walk it. He saw me standing in the hallway. Hazel, say goodnight to Deacon Miller, he commanded. I walked over. Good night, Deacon. Thank you for coming. God bless you, child, the deacon said, looking at me like I was a tragic figure. Your father is a good man. You are lucky he is willing to take on your burdens. I know, I said. I am counting on it. By midnight, the guests were gone. The apartment was a wreck. Dirty plates were stacked on my architectural books. Wine stains spotted the rug. Well, my father said, loosening his tie. That went well. The community is with us. I am going to bed, Colton grumbled. He wouldn't look at Brielle. Brielle wouldn't look at him. The air between them was toxic. You can sleep on the sofa, Hazel, my mother said. Pointing to the couch, Brielle had covered in gold fabric. We need the master bedroom. Grant has back pain. Of course, I said. It is your house now. Not until tomorrow morning, my father corrected, checking his watch. 10 a.m. Do not be late. I won't be, I said. They retreated to my bedroom. I heard the door click shut. I heard the lock turn. They were locking me out of my own room in my own house. I turned off the main lights. The apartment was bathed in the orange glow of the city streetlights. I walked to the kitchen. I started cleaning, not because they told me to, but because I needed to touch things. I needed to verify that reality was still there. I picked up a wine glass Brielle had left on the counter. It was smeared with her lipstick. I washed it. I dried it. I placed it back in the cabinet. I stood there in the dark, listening to the silence. I could hear my father snoring faintly from the bedroom. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. They were sleeping. They were resting up for their victory lap. I imagined the courtroom tomorrow. I imagined the bailiff reading the list. Item 1, Item 2, Item 3. I thought about Brielle's secret debt. I thought about Colton's fraud. I thought about my father's theft. I had packaged it all. Every sin, every lie, every stolen dollar. I had wrapped it up in a legal document and tied it with a bow made of their own greed. Cough it up, I whispered to the darkness. You want my life? You can have the whole thing. I walked to the sofa and sat down. I didn't sleep. I just watched the sun come up over the mountains, lighting up the city that used to scare me, but now felt like an arena. Today was the day. Today. The Parker family legacy ended, and the audit began. The King County Superior Court was a study in beige and fluorescent indifference. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the damp wool of cheap suits. I walked down the hallway toward courtroom 4B, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic cadence against the linoleum. Damon walked beside me. He had traded his fraying jacket for a sharp, dark suit that I suspected he had rented just for this morning. He carried a leather briefcase that contained nothing but a single, thick document and a bottle of water. He did not look like the disgraced lawyer my father had destroyed 10 years ago. He looked like a shark that had quietly circled back into the deep water. Remember, Damon said, his voice low, barely moving his lips. You are not here to win an argument. You are here to lose one. You have to lose so hard that they trip over themselves trying to catch the trophy. I am ready, I said. My stomach was a knot of cold wire, but my hands were steady. I was wearing the charcoal gray suit. My hair was pulled back in a severe low bun. I wore no jewelry. I was the picture of a woman holding herself together with invisible tape. We pushed through the double doors. The gallery was packed. My father had mobilized the troops. 3 rows of pews were filled with the senior elders of Grace Community Chapel, the deacon board, and a few of the wealthy donors who had been at my apartment the night before. They sat with their hands folded in their laps, whispering to one another, shaking their heads with solemn pity as I walked down the center aisle. It was theater. My father had turned a legal hearing into a morality play, and I was the sinner being brought before the judgment seat. My parents were already seated at the plaintiff's table. Gavin Blackwell sat between them, arranging his files with precise, confident movements. Colton and Brielle sat in the front row of the gallery, directly behind them. Colton looked hungover. His skin was pasty, and he kept checking his phone. Brielle looked bored, inspecting her manicure, but her leg was bouncing nervously. I took my seat at the defendant's table. Damon sat next to me. "Who is this?" Judge Randall Hart asked as he swept into the room, his black robe billowing. He took his seat on the elevated bench and peered over his reading glasses at Damon. "Damon Rourke, Your Honor," Damon said, standing up, acting as strategic consultant and legal proxy for Ms. Parker, who is representing herself pro SC today. Judge Hart's eyes narrowed. He recognized the name. He looked at my father, then back at Damon. "Mr. Rourke, I was under the impression you were no longer practicing in this state." "I am not appearing as attorney of record, Your Honor," Damon said smoothly. "I am merely here to assist Ms. Parker in organizing her documents and facilitating a resolution. We do not intend to delay the court's time." "See that you do not," Judge Hart grunted. He opened the file in front of him. "We are here on the matter of the emergency guardianship of Hazel Marie Parker. The petitioners allege incapacity and imminent risk to the estate. Mr. Blackwell." "You may proceed." Gavin Blackwell stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He had the easy swagger of a man who knew the judge played golf with his client. "Your Honor," Blackwell began, his voice projecting to the back of the room, "we are here with heavy hearts. Reverend and Mrs. Parker love their daughter. They have watched with growing alarm as she has spiraled into paranoia, erratic spending, and social isolation. The incident at the restaurant, the barricading of her home, the delusional accusations against her family, these are not the actions of a sound mind." My father nodded gravely. My mother dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We are asking the court to make the temporary order permanent," Blackwell continued, "to grant Reverend and Mrs. Parker full conservatorship over Hazel's person and estate. They wish to secure her assets, ensure she receives proper psychiatric care, and protect her from her own self-destructive impulses. This is a rescue mission, Your Honor." Blackwell sat down. The gallery murmured its approval. Amen. So sad. Good parents. Judge Hart turned his gaze to me. It was a look of patronizing exhaustion. "Ms. Parker, you have the right to respond. You have the right to present evidence of your competency. Do you wish to call a witness? Do you have a medical evaluation to refute Dr. Aris?" I stood up. I held the edge of the table. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch. "No, Your Honor," I said. My voice was quiet, forcing the room to lean in. "No." Judge Hart blinked. "You do not wish to defend yourself." "I do not want to fight anymore," I said. I looked at my parents. I let a look of absolute defeat wash over my face. My father is right. I have been overwhelmed. The pressure of my job, the numbers. I feel like I'm drowning. My father sat up straighter. A gleam of victory ignited in his eyes. "I tried to manage it alone," I continued, looking down at my hands. "But maybe I can't. Maybe I do need help. I do not want the stress of owning things anymore. I do not want the mortgage. I do not want the bills. I just want peace." "Are you consenting to the guardianship?" Judge Hart asked, his pen hovering over the order. "I have a different proposal," I said. "One that I think is faster and cleaner." I signaled to Damon. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the thick document, the Voluntary Asset Transfer Agreement. He walked over and handed copies to the bailiff, the judge, and Gavin Blackwell. "Your Honor," I said, "guardianship implies that I am a child. It requires annual reports. It requires the court to monitor every penny my parents spend on my behalf. That seems like a burden on the court, and a burden on them." I paused. I saw my father stiffen at the mention of monitoring. He did not want monitoring. He wanted cash. "Instead," I said, "I am offering a total surrender. I am willing to sign a voluntary asset transfer. I will transfer the legal title of every asset I own: my home, my investments, my bank accounts, my business entities directly to Grant and Lillian Parker, including the property in Leavenworth, including everything." The courtroom went silent. "It would be an irrevocable gift," I explained. They become the owners. Full stop. I walk away with nothing but my clothes. I go to a wellness retreat, which I will pay for with my final paycheck, and they get the estate. No court oversight, no annual filings, just theirs. I looked at my father. Is that what you wanted, Dad? To take care of it. My father looked at the document in front of him. He wasn't reading the text. He was looking at the summary. Asset value, $1.4 million. He licked his lips. Your Honor. Gavin Blackwell stood up slowly. He was frowning. This is highly irregular. A total transfer of assets without a competency hearing. If Ms. Parker is claiming she is overwhelmed, is she competent to sign away her life savings? I am competent enough to know I want out, I said sharply. I am competent enough to know that my family needs these resources more than I do. My brother needs a home. My father needs to fund his ministry. Why should the money sit in my accounts while they struggle? I hit the bullseye. I validated their greed. I justified their theft. Your Honor, my father interrupted, standing up. If Hazel is offering this as an act of penance, as an act of trust, who are we to refuse her? It shows she is thinking clearly again. She is prioritizing the family. Grant, Blackwell whispered loudly, we need to review the schedules, the tax implications alone. We are a tax-exempt household. Gavin, my father hissed back, do not complicate this. Judge Hart looked at the document. He flipped through the first few pages. Ms. Parker, do you understand what you are doing? You are leaving yourself destitute. The court rarely sees a respondent voluntarily impoverish themselves. I am not impoverishing myself, Your Honor, I said, looking him in the eye. I am unburdening myself. I want to be light. I want to start over. Please, let them have it. Let them have all of it. Judge Hart looked at my parents. He saw two upstanding citizens willing to take the burden. He looked at the clock. It was 10:45. If he signed this, the case was closed. No trial, no testimony. He could make his tea time. If the petitioners are willing to accept the transfer in lieu of guardianship, Judge Hart said, the court sees no reason to intervene in a private contract. We accept, my father said instantly. Wait, Blackwell said. He turned to the back of the document. I need to review Appendix B, the schedule of liabilities and encumbrances. My heart stopped. It was a physical sensation, a seizure in my chest. If he read Appendix B, really read it, he would see Verity Holdings. He would see the EPA fines. He would see the lease. Mr. Blackwell, I said, my voice trembling. I listed everything, the mortgage, the credit cards. It is all standard. If you do not sign now, I might change my mind. Maybe I should fight. Maybe I should call witnesses about the church funds. It was a bluff, but it was a calculated one. I threatened to make it messy. My father's head snapped toward me. He heard church funds. He knew what I knew. He knew that if this went to trial, discovery would open his books. He put his hand on Blackwell's arm, a heavy, controlling grip. Gavin, my father said, his voice hard. She is signing over $1 million. Do not look a gift horse in the mouth. We sign. Now. Grant, I have a fiduciary duty to... I am the client, my father barked. I said we sign. He grabbed the pen from the table. Where do I sign? My father asked. Page 4, Damon said helpfully. And page 12? And the initial block on the appendices. My father signed. He slashed his signature across the paper with the arrogance of a king annexing a new territory. He passed the document to my mother. She signed, smiling at me a beatific, forgiving smile that made me want to vomit. Colton needs to sign too, I said gently. Since he is taking title to the Leavenworth property and the other business entities, he needs to be a named party. My father turned to the gallery. Colton, get down here. Colton scrambled over the railing. He looked eager. He looked like he was about to win the lottery. Just sign here, son, my father said. It is all ours. Colton grabbed the pen. Does this mean the condo is mine? It means you are the owner of record. I said, you and Dad, 50-50, Colton signed. He didn't even look at the page numbers. He just signed where Damon pointed. It was done. Gavin Blackwell looked like he wanted to object, but he had been overruled by his own clients. He sat back, crossing his arms, distancing himself from the inevitable malpractice suit. "The court acknowledges the voluntary asset transfer agreement," Judge Hart said, banging his gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "The petition for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. The assets are transferred. Ms. Parker, you are free to go." My father stood up. He held the signed document against his chest. He looked at the gallery. He beamed. "Praise God," he announced. "The family is whole again." The gallery applauded. Polite, church applause. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at Damon. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "Your Honor," I said, "one last procedural matter." Judge Hart sighed. "What is it now, Ms. Parker?" "The agreement states that upon signing, the schedule of assets and assumed liabilities must be read into the public record to ensure that the transfer is transparent and that I cannot claim later that I hid anything. It is Clause 14. Blackwell flipped to Clause 14. "She is right. It is boilerplate, but it is there." "Fine." Judge Hart waved his hand at the bailiff. "Deputy Alvarez, please read the summary. Let's get this over with." Deputy Alvarez, a burly man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, walked over to the plaintiff's table. He took the copy of the document from my father's hand. My father let go of it easily. Why wouldn't he? He thought it was just a list of prizes. Alvarez walked to the podium. He adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat. The room went quiet. My parents stood there, smiling, waiting to hear the list of their new wealth. Colton had his arm around Brielle. They looked like royalty. I sat down. I folded my hands. I watched them. "Inventory of transferred estate," Alvarez read in a monotone voice. "Item 1 residential condominium located at 402 Skyline Avenue, value estimated at $850,000. Subject to primary mortgage and secondary high-interest lien in the amount of $200,000. My father's smile faltered slightly. He whispered to my mother, "We knew about the lien. It is fine." "Item 2, Alvarez continued. "Investment portfolio number 882. Balance $12.40. My mother blinked. $12, she whispered. I thought she said 6 figures. "Item 3. Alvarez read, turning the page. Here it was, the drop. 100% ownership and assumption of full legal liability for the entity known as Verity Holdings, LLC. My father looked bored. He didn't know the name. "Note attached to inventory," Alvarez continued, his brow furrowing. He paused. He looked closer at the paper. Verity Holdings, LLC is the named defendant in active investigation case number 492 regarding wire fraud and money laundering. The silence in the room changed. It shifted from respectful to confused. "Item 4, Alvarez read, picking up speed. "Assumption of liability for the commercial lease at Pioneer Square executed by guardian Colton Parker utilizing fraudulent credentials. Total obligation, $300,000. Colton's face drained of blood. He dropped his arm from Brielle's shoulder. "Item 5, Alvarez read. Title to Leavenworth. Property, subject to active Environmental Protection Agency citation number 772, daily fine of $5,000. Total outstanding penalty $150,000. "Wait," my father said. His voice was not booming anymore. It was small. "Wait, stop." "Item 6, Alvarez ignored him. Assumption of debt for the Heritage Preservation Society, identified as a shell company managed by Brielle Verzal, specifically regarding the misappropriation of charitable funds from Grace Community Chapel. Judge Hart froze. He stopped organizing his papers. His head snapped up. "What did you say?" Judge Hart asked. His voice was sharp. "Read that again." "Misappropriation of charitable funds," Alvarez read. "Linking transfers to Judge Randall Hart's re-election committee fund via third-party donor." Judge Hart stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. His face went from flushed to a terrifying, ghostly white. My father was shaking his head. No, I didn't sign that. I didn't read that. You signed it, Grant, I said. I didn't shout. I spoke clearly into the silence. You signed for all of it. The laundry, the fraud, the bribes. It is your asset now. The courtroom doors opened at the back. 2 men in suits walked in. They were not lawyers. They wore the specific, nondescript suits of federal agents. They had been waiting in the hall, waiting for the signature, waiting for the moment the crime was no longer an allegation against me, but a confessed asset of my father. My mother screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of realization. I looked at Gavin Blackwell. He had closed his laptop. He was slowly moving his chair away from the table, creating physical distance between himself and his clients. I looked at my father. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as a giant, but as a man standing in a pit he had dug with his own hands. "Deputy," Judge Hart stammered, looking at the agents at the door. "Seal the courtroom." "I do not think you can seal this, Randall," I said softly. The bailiff looked at the judge, then at the paper, then at the agents. He kept reading. "Item 7, Deputy Alvarez did not look up from the page. He was a machine now, a mechanism of the state churning through the data I had provided. The room was deathly quiet, the kind of silence that usually precedes a structural collapse. "Item 1, Alvarez read, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Residential condominium at 402 Skyline Avenue. As per the accelerated clause in the mortgage contract, the transfer of title to a third party in this case, Grant and Lillian Parker, triggers an immediate demand for the full outstanding principal. The current market value is $850,000. The total immediate repayment obligation, including the secondary lien and prepayment penalties, is $920,000. My father's smile froze. It didn't fade. It just petrified. He did not have $900,000. He barely had the $200,000 for the loan shark. He had assumed he could sell the condo and pocket the difference. He hadn't read the mortgage fine print. He didn't know about the transfer penalty. He had just bought a $70,000 debt. Item 2, Alvarez droned on. Tax liability associated with the family trust structure used to execute this transfer. By accepting the assets as a gift rather than a purchase, the recipients Grant and Lillian Parker accept the retroactive capital gains tax liability for the previous 7 years of unfiled adjustments. Estimated obligation to the Internal Revenue Service, $140,000. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. She grabbed Gavin Blackwell's arm. "Gavin, what is he saying? You said this was tax-free." Blackwell was sweating, visible. Beaded sweat gathered on his forehead. I assumed the previous filings were compliant. I didn't see the addendum about the unfiled adjustments. "You didn't read it," I whispered. My voice carried. "You were too busy counting your billable hours." Item 3, Alvarez continued. He turned the page. Regarding the entity known as Verity Holdings, the new owner of record, Colton Parker, assumes the position of managing director. This position carries personal liability for the ongoing civil suit regarding data privacy violations and corporate malfeasance filed by the state attorney general. Colton turned the color of old milk. He looked at the paper his father had forced him to sign moments ago. He looked at me. He realized, for the first time in his life, that a title wasn't just something you bragged about at a bar. It was a chain. "I didn't do anything," Colton stammered, standing up. "I just signed it today. I am not the director." "The signature says you are," Alvarez said, not looking up. Item 4, personal expenditures incurred by the temporary guardians during the period of emergency oversight. The transfer agreement categorizes these not as estate expenses, but as assumed personal debt of the guardians. Alvarez squinted at the list, including $4,000 for luxury home goods, $6,000 for a Breitling wristwatch, $40,000 for the settlement of gambling debts owed to Apex Recovery Services on behalf of Brielle Verzal. Brielle shot out of her seat. Her velvet dress suddenly looked like a costume. "That is a lie that is private." "It is public record now, ma'am," Alvarez said. "You listed it as a liability to be paid by the estate. The estate is now yours. So is the debt." The gallery was buzzing. The church elders were whispering furiously. The image of the pious, suffering family was dissolving in real time, replaced by a picture of greedy, squabbling looters. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching Judge Hart. He was staring at the bailiff with a look of growing horror. He knew what was coming. He knew I knew. "Item 5, Alvarez read. "The Good Samaritan Fund. The new owners of the estate acknowledge the receipt of funds previously transferred from Grace Community Chapel to the shell company known as the Heritage Preservation Society." My father closed his eyes. He knew this was the end of his ministry, but he didn't know it was the end of his freedom. "Item 6, Alvarez read. This was the one, the bombshell. A series of payments totaling $50,000, labeled as consulting fees, paid to the re-election committee of a public official via a third-party proxy named Sarah Vance. Judge Hart slammed his hand on the bench. "Stop, Deputy. That is enough. The document requires the full reading, Your Honor," Alvarez said, confused by the judge's outburst. "I am almost done. The recipient of these funds is identified as the Heart for Justice Campaign Fund." The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of 300 people realizing they were witnessing a felony. Judge Hart stood up, knocking his chair over. He looked like a trapped animal. "Bailiff, clear the court. This is a fabrication. I am holding the defendant in contempt. Security, remove her." "Sit down, Randall." The voice came from the back of the room. It was calm, authoritative, and terrifying. The double doors swung open. The two men in suits I had seen earlier walked in, but they weren't alone. Behind them was a woman wearing a badge on a lanyard that read, "FBI Financial Crimes Division." "Federal agents," the woman announced. "Nobody moves. Nobody leaves." My father stood frozen. He looked at the document in his hands, the document he had just signed, acknowledging ownership of the shell company that bribed the judge. "This is a misunderstanding." My father squeaked. His voice was gone. The boom was gone. "I didn't my daughter, she tricked me." "Did she force your hand to the paper, Reverend?" the FBI agent asked, walking down the aisle. "Did she hold a gun to your head, or did you sign it because you thought you were getting $1 million for free?" "You signed a voluntary asset transfer," the agent said, reaching the table. "You legally claimed these entities, you claimed the assets, and you claimed the crimes attached to them. Grant Parker, Lillian Parker, Colton Parker, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to bribe a public official." She turned to the bench. "And Judge Hart, we have a warrant for your chambers and your bank records. Sarah Vance is already in custody." Judge Hart slumped back against the wall behind the bench. He looked small. He looked like a man who realized that his robe was just a piece of polyester. Not a shield. The gallery erupted. Flashbulbs from cell phones started popping. The church elders were standing up, distancing themselves from the Parker family, shouting questions. Damon leaned over to me. "Don't smile," he whispered. "Not yet." I kept my face blank. I looked at my father as the agent pulled his hands behind his back. I saw the handcuffs click. The sound was distinct. It cut through the noise of the room. My mother was sobbing, clinging to Gavin Blackwell, who was actively trying to peel her fingers off his suit jacket. Colton was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, weeping like a child. Brielle was already typing on her phone, probably trying to delete her Instagram account, unaware that the internet is forever. "Ms. Parker," the FBI agent said, turning to me. "You are the whistleblower on record." "Yes," I said. "I submitted the files to your office 3 days ago, through the portal. And this transfer agreement. I wanted to make sure they admitted to ownership," I said. "I didn't want there to be any ambiguity about who was controlling those funds." "There is no ambiguity now," the agent said. She looked at the judge, who was being escorted off the bench by a marshal. "We will need your statement. But for now you are free to go. Judge Hart, trying to salvage one last shred of dignity before he was led away, pointed a shaking finger at the clerk. Vacate the guardianship order. The respondent is obviously competent. Dismiss the petition. It was a pathetic final act, but it was the one I needed. The gavel did not bang. There was no one left to bang it. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I looked at my father one last time. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. He still didn't understand how it had happened. He thought he was the shepherd. He never realized he was just another sheep waiting to be shorn. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. I turned and walked up the aisle. The sea of people parted for me. The same people who had looked at me with pity 20 minutes ago now looked at me with fear. They saw what I had done. They saw the precision of it. I pushed open the doors and walked out into the hallway. Damon was right behind me. "That," Damon said, lighting a cigarette the moment we stepped out of the building, "was a work of art. I haven't had that much fun since law school." "Did we get everything?" I asked. "We got everything. The assets are frozen as evidence, but since the transfer was signed, they are technically their assets that are frozen. You are clear. The debt is theirs. The jail time is theirs. And my name?" "Your name is Hazel Parker," Damon said. "The woman who cleaned house." I walked out onto the steps of the courthouse. The Seattle rain had stopped. The air was cold and crisp, smelling of pine and ocean salt. I took a deep breath. My lungs expanded fully for the first time in weeks. I didn't feel the phantom weight of the dead anymore. I didn't feel the suffocating pressure of my family's expectations. I pulled out my phone. I dialed the number for Harbor Crest Forensic Solutions. "Human Resources," a voice answered. "This is Hazel Parker," I said. "I am calling to inform you that the court order regarding my competency has been vacated. I have the documentation. However, I am not calling to get my badge back." "Oh, Ms. Parker, we heard there were legal issues." "The legal issues have been resolved," I said, "but I am resigning, effective immediately." "Resigning but Hazel. You are our best auditor." "I know," I said. "That is why I'm going into business for myself. There is a lot of fraud in this city, and I think I have a knack for exposing it." I hung up. I looked at Damon. "I owe you a steak." "Damn right you do," he said. "The biggest one they have." "Let's go," I said. "But first, I need to make a stop." "Where?" "The locksmith," I said. "I need to change the codes on my apartment, and this time, there is no emergency key." I walked down the stairs, my heels clicking on the pavement. I was alone. I had no parents. I had no brother. I had no inheritance. But I had my mind. I had my freedom, and I had the absolute, unshakable knowledge that nobody would ever try to take them from me again. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't need to. I knew what was happening inside. I knew the paperwork was being filed. I knew the lists were being checked. My father used to say that the truth shall set you free. He was right. He just forgot that the truth is also a weapon. And if you hold it by the wrong end, it will cut you. I hailed a cab. I slid into the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Forward," I said. "Just drive forward." I watched the city pass by through the window. It was my city now, not theirs. I didn't win because I was cruel. I didn't win because I was stronger or louder or more aggressive. I won because I read the fine print, and they didn't. Thank you so much for listening to Hazel's story. It's been a wild ride exposing the Parker family secrets, and I hope you enjoyed every twist of the knife. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below with your city or country, so we can see how far Hazel's revenge has traveled. And if you want more stories where the underdog bites back, please make sure to subscribe to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get heard by more people. See you in the next one.